Today we're talking about 4 tips to give your footage a more retro or filmic look. Let's get into it. Before we start, I do want to point out that a lot of people use the word film look and the words cinematic interchangeably, and in my mind these are two completely separate things. The film look is about the way the frame looks. It's the overall grunge, dirt, flares, all that sort of stuff. It's the overall look of the footage. Cinematic is something completely different. It's a big, bombastic feeling more than anything, and it can be crystal sharp and modern looking. It can be very, very ancient, old and retro. Anywhere in between, it's still cinematic. It's a very different sort of scenario. The cinematic look involves set dressing. It involves camera movement. It involves motivation. It involves lighting, all sorts of stuff like that. None of that is the subject of this video. Today, we're literally going to take your footage and we're going to make it look old. We're going to make it look dirty. We're going to make it look a little bit retro. We're going to give it a vibe. But with that said, we're not going to look for accuracy. We're not trying to make your footage look exactly like Alfred Hitchcock's footage in Psycho, or we're not trying to make it look like the original Star Wars or anything like that. We're not looking for accuracy. We're just trying to give it just a little bit of grunge. That's what we're after. These are 4 tips that I think will help you achieve that, and you can use them together, all in concert, or you can use them one at a time just to add a little bit of life. And let me just finally say, yeah, this is some tips for you, but it's also a bit of an experiment for me because I've done all these things in the past. I've used them in a lot of my footage, but I've never sat down and done exactly what we're doing today, which is being able to look at the same footage in multiple versions with or without different elements here. So let's get into it. Tip number 1 is the same tip that I'm going to give you for just about any footage that you film, regardless of what you're trying to do, and that is to film in a flat profile. If your camera has a log profile, a Sony camera has S-Log, Panasonic has V-Log. In a Blackmagic camera, you can switch it to B-RAW and switch it to the film mode. There's lots of different versions out there. If you've got that, take advantage of it. If you don't have a camera that does that, the next best thing is to find a neutral profile, pull down your saturation, pull down your sharpness, and pull down your contrast. Try and get it as flat as possible, but still having the information there. The reason for this, and it extends beyond the point of this video, is that when it comes to finally working with your footage in your editor and color grading, sometimes you want to push it a little bit further than it naturally wants to go. If you filmed it in a flat profile, all that information is there, and you can do this a lot better, a lot easier, and you can push it a lot further before the footage starts to break. There's a thing called tearing. It's just a digital artifact noise. It's not filmic, it's not retro, and it's definitely not cinematic. You don't want to go for that. So if you're filming in a standard or a vivid profile, there's not a lot that you can do with color grading after the fact to really change the feel or the vibe of your footage. Film in a flat profile as much as possible. And as I said, this goes beyond the film look. Anything that you're doing, your best to do in a vlog profile. The second tip is a slightly bigger and more complex one, and it is simply this. If you are trying to create footage that looks old, if it looks retro, if you just want that vibe, it makes a lot of sense to use any gear that you can that will help you along the way, that will be a little bit more of that feeling inherently. Nothing is going to do that more than using an old lens. Yes, we want to capture modern footage. It's going to come digital. You have to use a modern camera, but you can use a vintage lens, and you can, especially these days, incredibly easily. Old lenses, vintage lenses are available for anywhere from $5 to $10 to $100, $200, $300, anywhere in between, depending which one you go for. Some are more highly prized, but there's a ton out there. They're available in op shops, they're available in junk stores. I get some from the Salvation Army occasionally. You can get them on eBay. There's a ton of them, and they don't have to be great. They don't have to be fantastic. The great thing about a vintage lens is, despite all the other aspects, and one day I'll do a full video about vintage lenses, but they're inexpensive. They give you a lower contrast usually. They introduce some interesting and unique aberrations, especially around the edge of your frame. They have some strange barrel distortion that occurs occasionally. Their rendering of bokeh when you open up is very, very different from modern clinically sharp lenses. Chromatic aberrations, as I think I might have mentioned already. And finally, just a certain kind of softness. It may be incredibly sharp at the middle, but the edge can start falling off into a sort of soft mushiness, which in a modern lens you wouldn't want. But if you're trying to introduce that feel anyway, it just makes sense to do as much of it as you can in the lens itself. Lenses, like I said, are available quite inexpensively. All you need for a modern camera is an adapter. Because most of these vintage lenses are manual, you don't have any electronics, you don't have autofocus, you're going to have to learn to use them in a manual mode, but that actually saves you a lot of money because they're very, very cheap to get the lens, and the adapters themselves don't have to have any fancy electronics. They're quite simply a mount to a different mount. That's all it needs to be. And they work very, very well with mirrorless cameras and all that sort of stuff. I'm a big fan. It's a huge range of mounts that you can get, adapters out there. Make sure, of course, that you get the right one for the lens that you've got, but I think they're called Urth, U-R-T-H, Urth. They're a company that I've bought a number of adapters from. I'm a big fan of them. And I think they're actually just down the road for me. I'll have to go see them one day. Anyway, that is the second tip. It is going to take you about 30% of the way there when it comes to giving your footage just a little bit more of that grunge, a little bit more of that retro vibe. The next step is one that is used commonly across films. This is starting to verge into that cinematic territory, although we'll still call it filmic for the sake of this video. And it is something that is used in big, high-budget movies, and it is something that separates often a lot of low-budget movies from the looking cheap and nasty to looking a little bit more filmic, and that is filters. In our modern day, we think of filters as being something that you might turn on or off in Instagram. Sometimes we think of filters as being something that Photoshop might do to our images and stuff like that. But in the old days, a filter was literally something that you put on the front of your lens to filter the light coming in and change the characteristics of that light before it hits the film, or in our case, the sensor. There are two different filters that I recommend specifically for the film look. One of them is a mist filter. There's a whole range of them out there. The one that I've got is incredibly cheap. It comes from Neewer. I always call it Neewer, N-E-E-W-E-R, Neewer. I have no idea how you're not supposed to say that. But yeah, I like the brand. I like their grip gear. Their filters do leave a little less to be desired. There are better filters out there. I could have spent twice as much, if not more, but we're working on a budget today, so I think this one will do a fine job. Again, it's going to lower the contrast of our image. It's also going to add a little bit of halation. So anywhere that you have a bright light in your image, a specular highlight, anything like that, is going to have a little bit of halation around the sides. Halation is just exactly like it sounds. It's just a little bit of a light halo around bright objects. It's not fantastic with the newer one, but it's enough to get us into that ballpark. The second filter that I've used in this testing is it's a newer one that I've gotten. Again, it's also a newer brand, but I've only just received it because I was very curious as to how it worked. This is a flare filter, and what it does is it's a piece of glass that has some lines through it. When the light hits those lines, it's going to introduce some dramatic straight line flares into your image. It is very interesting. Very interesting to play with. I'm not 100% sold on it. There are different versions out there, and the same thing, there are better quality ones and there are cheaper ones, and I opted for the cheapest possible. The one that I have, the lines are blue, but you can also get ones where they have gold lines, so depending on what your footage needs are, that may change. Also, the thing about these filters is that even though they may be colored blue or gold, if you're flare, if your subject is a colored light, it's going to take on the color of the light and not the color of the filter. It's only when the light is white or close to white that it's going to have that hint of blue or hint of gold. The idea of these is to add sort of an anamorphic look. Anamorphic lenses, beyond the scope of this video, but they're basically ultra widescreen lenses. The specific effects of an anamorphic lens is the shape of the bokeh, the quality of the flare, and of course that aspect ratio. We can fake the aspect ratio in post. It's not really going to look like anamorphic because other aspects aren't there, but we can fake that. We can't really fake the bokeh shape. There is one way that some people do, but I don't think it's even worth it. I'd rather just get an anamorphic lens, and with this filter we can fake the anamorphic flare. Is it good? You know, I'm going to leave it up to you to decide. Honestly, I'm on the fence. The fourth and final tip here is when it comes to color grading and finally processing your image. Now, I said at the very beginning that the first tip was to shoot in vlog, and this one goes hand in hand with that one. Because you shot in vlog and you've done a variety of things in the shooting process to try and age, grungify your image, it just makes sense to try not to reduce that in post. It is very, very easy to bring your footage back to a proper Rec 709 look. Most cameras have a LUT that comes with them or is easily available that's going to correct your color back to where it should be. And that works really, really well for the majority of footage that you're going to do, face sex stuff like this, that sort of thing. But if you're trying to go for that retro look, I'm a big fan of a piece of software called Film Convert. Now, I picked up mine quite a while ago, and I picked up a bundle deal, which basically means that I have a perpetual license for both Premiere Pro, DaVinci Resolve, Final Cut, which I don't even use, and I think a couple of other versions. That's the big bundle version. You can also buy independently for whatever software you prefer, but the price difference is so marginal. I'd recommend getting the full bundle just because if you do decide in the future to change, if you're a Premiere user now but you decide to step up to Resolve, you've got this tool in your arsenal ready to go. Film Convert is a very, very easy and simple piece of software to use. You bring your software into your editing software, you throw Film Convert on as a plugin. Now then you're going to go in there and you're going to tell it what to expect from the footage. You need to select what brand you've got, you're going to choose what model of camera you've got, and then you're going to tell it what color profile you use. As again, I used Vlog, which is the Panasonic log profile. So once I've told it all those things, it now knows how that footage is put together, what to expect from it, and it can basically emulate a traditional film process in the software and spit that out for you, and it does a very, very nice job. You can select what kind of film stock you use, you can select what kind of print stock you use, and you can control the fine details of your grain, which is phenomenal because sometimes you want a little bit of that old world feel, but you don't want quite as much grain. And you can also tune in just the contrast if you want, or you can tune in just the color. It gets a little bit weird in my opinion when you mess with those, but you can do that. It's quite a nice and handy and fairly inexpensive way of, once you've done all the pre-work with your footage, doing that final step to introduce a little bit of a film feel or a film look. Of course, that's not everything. That's basically color correcting into film. After that, then you're going to want to grade. I'm not going to get a huge amount into grading in this video. There's a whole lot to learn about grading. I will admit I'm not the best grader in the world, and there's a lot of information out there, and I'm not done my learning journey when it comes to color grading. But just to give you a little bit of a sample, this is the footage. I've shown you a ton of footage already, but this is a little bit of footage that I decided to film just outside the front of the house. This is it with a raw, untouched. This is it with the film conversion, and this is it with a film conversion and a little bit of grade added on top. And just for giggles, we're going to throw some bars on there and make it look just a little bit more anamorphic. The final bonus tip that I will throw in, it's not one that really counts, but if you really want to add just a touch more, you can always throw a flare overlay on top of your footage as well, just to add a little bit more of that anamorphic realism if you wanted. As I said at the very beginning, the idea here was not to make perfect footage that accurately replicates what was used in any specific film, but just a couple of different tips that stacked together will push your film more into that gritty, earthy, analog, warm feeling and away from that digital, sterile, clean look that we get so often and so easily with modern cameras. You can take my footage as it is. I'll be honest, none of this footage was anything special. None of it was really fancy. As I said at the beginning, cinematic is a lot more than just processing your footage. It's all to do with the light and the motion and the movement and the set dressing and all that sort of stuff. And I, to be honest, took very little time in doing any of that with this footage. It is literally just sample and test footage. So with that said, I hope that you've picked up a few tips. I'd love to see what you do with them. If you turn around and incorporate some of this into your work, please tag me below in the comments. I'd love to see some of that. I'd love to see how you do it. If I've done anything wrong, if you've watched this video and you're like, yeah, but I do this and it's much better, if you have some tips, man, I'm always happy to learn new stuff. So share those with me. And other than that, yeah, as always, keep working and stay creative.